she was in pain every day. The lone rancher who shocked the town, the morning sun rose slowly over the wide, empty fields of Texas, casting a golden light over the Collins Ranch. Birds chirped softly, and the faint sound of wind moving through the dry grass was the only sign of life beyond the ranch house. Martha Collins stirred in her small bedroom, wincing as she moved. Every morning was the same, a painful reminder of the years she had spent working this land alone. Her joints ached, her back protested, and yet she knew she could not let the pain stop her. The ranch demanded attention, and the animals depended on her. There was no one else to do it. Martha had lived on this ranch all her life. The property had belonged to her family for generations, and she had inherited it after her parents passed away. It was a vast, lonely place, stretching as far as the eye could see, with fences that needed constant repair and cattle that required endless care. Most people in town thought she was strange, a woman living alone in such a harsh environment. But Martha took pride in her independence. She had always been strong-willed, determined to face life on her own terms. Asking for help, in her mind, was a weakness she could never allow herself to show. As she got out of bed, Martha moved slowly, carefully, as though every motion had to be calculated. The slightest misstep could send sharp pain shooting through her legs or back. She rubbed her hands together, feeling the stiffness that had become part of her daily life. Her body had carried the weight of years, long hours in the sun, heavy lifting, and the constant labor that ranch life demanded. She remembered the accident she had suffered a decade ago, when she had fallen while repairing a fence. The injury never healed completely, and the lingering pain had been a constant companion ever since. But Martha had learned to live with it, to ignore it when she could, and to push herself past it when she had no choice. Her morning routine was methodical. She filled the water troughs for the cattle, checked on the horses, and inspected the fences for any damage. Each task brought its own challenges. Lifting heavy buckets or pulling nails from old wooden posts tested her strength, and each movement reminded her of the pain she carried. Still, Martha never complained. She had built her life around the idea that suffering was a part of living, and she had become an expert at hiding it. To the few townspeople who occasionally passed by, she seemed unbreakable, almost superhuman in her ability to handle the harshness of life. They could not see the struggle hidden behind her calm face, the quiet determination that kept her going despite everything. By mid-morning, the sun climbed higher, and the heat began to press down on the open fields. Martha paused for a moment, leaning on a fence post, wiping sweat from her brow. She allowed herself a brief breath, a moment to acknowledge the toll her body was paying. Her mind wandered to thoughts she rarely voiced aloud. She thought of the loneliness that settled over the ranch in the evenings, when the sun disappeared behind the horizon and silence returned. Nights were the hardest. The pain seemed louder then, echoing in the stillness of her home. Sometimes she felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her almost as heavily as the physical pain did. She had no children, no siblings nearby, and the town was several miles away. Visits from neighbors were infrequent, polite, and usually brief. They admired her, respected her independence, but they did not truly know her. And Martha liked it that way. She had learned to rely on herself because she had no choice. After tending to the animals, Martha went inside the ranch house to prepare breakfast. The small kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering scent of wood smoke from the stove. She moved carefully, her movements deliberate. Opening cabinets and reaching for utensils caused sharp reminders of her pain, but she ignored them. She had done this routine hundreds, maybe thousands, of times, and yet each morning felt like a small battle she had to win. Sitting down at the worn wooden table, She poured herself a cup of coffee and gazed out the window at the land she loved so dearly. This ranch was more than a home. It was a part of her identity. Every fence post she had repaired, every acre she had tilled, every animal she had cared for was a testament to her resilience. Even with all her work and all her effort, there were days when the loneliness was unbearable. Martha missed having someone to share her thoughts with, someone to watch the sunset with, or to talk to about the small victories and challenges of the day. She often thought of friends from her youth who had left town seeking lives in the city or in places where life was easier. She had never left. She had chosen to stay and carry the responsibility of the ranch herself, and in doing so she had grown strong, but also isolated. She often wondered if people in town truly understood what it meant to live a life so full of labor and so lacking in companionship. Most probably, they did not. They only saw the woman who could do it all and assumed she was fine. They did not see the nights when she cried quietly into her pillow, exhausted and in pain. As the day continued, Martha moved from task to task, never stopping for too long, never letting the pain dictate her pace. She fixed broken fences, fed the cattle, checked the water supply, and cleaned the barn. Each task reminded her of the years of hard work that had shaped her body and mind. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the storms that had destroyed fences, the floods that had threatened the land, and the harsh winters that had tested her endurance. Through all of it, she had persevered. She had learned to anticipate problems, to plan for difficulties, and to act decisively when needed. This ability to handle life alone was both a blessing and a burden. She had independence, but it came at the cost of constant struggle. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Martha finally allowed herself to pause. She stood on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the fields bathed in the warm light of evening. The cattle grazed quietly. The wind whispered through the grass, and for a moment, everything seemed peaceful. She could feel the pain in her body, the ache in her muscles and joints, but she also felt a sense of pride. This land, this ranch, and the life she had carved out for herself were the results of her determination. She had faced pain and isolation for decades, and she had survived. That night, as she prepared for bed, Martha reflected on the day. She knew that tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same pain, and the same lonely hours. Yet, she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had endured. Life on the ranch was not easy, and it had never been, but it had taught her resilience, patience, and strength. She had become a woman who could handle whatever came her way, and though the town may never fully understand her struggles, she carried on with quiet dignity. Martha closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the ranch fill her senses. Pain would not define her. Loneliness would not break her. She was a rancher, a woman of the land, and she would face each day with courage, even if no one else saw the battles she fought. She had built a life on her own terms, and she intended to continue, whatever the cost. The days on the Collins ranch passed slowly, each one blending into the next, yet each carried its own challenges. Martha Collins had grown used to the rhythm of her life, rising before dawn, tending to the animals, checking fences, and managing the endless tasks that came with running a ranch alone. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm of hidden struggles churned. Pain had become a constant companion, a shadow that never left her side. She had learned to ignore it, to push through, to act as if every ache and stiffness was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But some days the pain was harder to hide, creeping into her every movement, reminding her that her body had limits. The town rarely saw the real Martha. To them, she was strong, almost unbreakable. She mowed her fields alone, fixed fences in the sweltering heat, and rode her horse across the wide open land, appearing fearless and in complete control. But at home, behind the doors of her small ranch house, she faced a different reality. Nights were the hardest. The quiet of the ranch, which seemed peaceful during the day, became heavy and oppressive when the sun disappeared. The silence amplified every ache, every twinge, and every memory of pain. She often found herself sitting in the dim light of the kitchen, rubbing her sore back and thinking about the years of work her body had endured. Martha's injury from a decade ago still haunted her. She remembered the day vividly. A simple mistake while repairing a fence had led to a fall that injured her back and legs. The doctors had treated her, but the damage never fully healed. She had been left with chronic pain, and while medications helped, they were expensive and not always fully effective. Yet, she refused to let it define her life. She continued her work as though nothing had happened, hiding her struggles from the world and maintaining the independence she valued so deeply. Despite the pain, Martha was resourceful. She had learned countless ways to manage her daily chores without letting her body give out completely. She used small tricks to lift heavy objects, paced herself when tending to the cattle, and scheduled her tasks in ways that minimized strain. She became a master of quiet endurance. Yet, this resourcefulness could not shield her from accidents, and one day, a small misstep threatened to change everything. It happened on a hot, dry afternoon. Martha was walking along the edge of a fence, inspecting a broken post that the recent storm had damaged. She stepped on loose soil, her foot slipped, and she fell awkwardly, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her back and legs, sharper than anything she had felt in years. She gasped, struggling to get up, but the world seemed momentarily unstable. The cattle nearby looked at her with mild curiosity, unaware of her distress. For a few minutes, Martha lay there, letting the pain wash over her, silently cursing herself for being careless. She eventually pulled herself to her feet, grimacing with every movement, and leaned against the fence for support. The accident left her shaken, both physically and emotionally. She realized that her body was no longer as strong as it once had been, and the thought scared her. She had managed so long on her own, and now the reminder of her vulnerability was unavoidable. Despite this, she pushed herself to complete her tasks. She fixed the broken fence post, fed the animals, and returned to the house, each step a painful struggle. By the time she finally sat down in her worn kitchen chair, sweat dripping from her brow, she was exhausted. But Martha refused to let anyone see her weakness. She cleaned up quietly, poured herself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the land she had fought to maintain. In the following days, the accident lingered in her mind. The pain persisted, making even simple chores difficult. She found herself leaning on walls, moving slowly and resting whenever possible. Yet she did not reach out for help. Her pride, her independence, and her long-held habit of self-reliance kept her from asking for assistance. The town was close enough to notice something was wrong if they looked carefully, but they rarely did. Martha rarely ventured into town, only going when necessary, and she always presented herself as capable and strong. Few knew the extent of her struggles, and she intended to keep it that way. Even as she continued her daily work, Martha's mind often wandered. She thought about her parents, who had taught her the ways of the ranch, instilled in her the importance of perseverance, and encouraged her independence. They had lived hard lives, but they had also loved deeply. Martha often wondered if they would understand the burden she now carried, the loneliness she felt, and the constant ache in her body. She thought about the friends she had made long ago, friends who had left town and built lives elsewhere. Sometimes she wished she could share her pain with someone who truly understood, but Martha had learned that sharing her struggles often invited pity, and she had no patience for that. As the days passed, the townspeople began to notice small signs of change. The mailman mentioned that the mailbox had been crooked for several days. A neighbor passing by commented that the cattle seemed restless, as if the fences were not being checked as often. Rumors began to circulate. "Have you seen Martha lately? She hasn't been into town for a while." But no one truly knew what was happening behind the closed doors of her ranch. Martha kept her pain hidden, presenting only the version of herself that could handle anything. Despite the whispers and the subtle signs that something was amiss, Martha felt a quiet satisfaction in her ability to maintain control. She believed that if she admitted her struggles, it would diminish her identity, her pride, and the independence she had fought for all her life. Yet deep inside, she knew that she could not continue indefinitely without some help. The accident had been a wake-up call, a reminder that her strength had limits, and that life alone on the ranch carried risks she could no longer ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft orange, Martha sat on the porch, her back aching and her mind heavy with thought. She watched the cattle grazing quietly, listening to the wind rustle through the fields. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to acknowledge the full weight of her reality. She was strong, but not invincible. She was independent, but not immune to pain or injury. And while she had survived so far, survival alone was not enough. She needed to consider the possibility of help, of reaching out, even if it terrified her. As darkness fell, Martha prepared for another night alone. She moved slowly through her small home, attending to her evening chores, making a simple meal, and setting her things in order for the next day. She paused often, rubbing sore muscles, but she never let the pain dictate her actions completely. She had survived this far on her own, and she was determined to continue doing so. Yet, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet of the ranch, she could not ignore the nagging thought that perhaps she could not do it alone forever. Martha closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the ranch lull her into a restless sleep. Pain would always be part of her life, she knew, but she also realized that her determination could not carry her indefinitely. She had lived with hidden struggles for so long that asking for help seemed impossible. Still, deep down, a small seed of awareness had been planted. Life on the ranch had always been about resilience, about strength, and about facing challenges head-on. And now, she understood that resilience did not mean facing every challenge alone. Sometimes, survival required more than just physical endurance. It required the courage to let others in, even when it seemed impossible. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet life on the Collins Ranch began to draw the attention of the townspeople. Martha Collins had always been a private person. She rarely went into town except for essential supplies, and when she did, she carried herself with the same calm confidence that had always defined her. But lately, something seemed different. Her absence from the local market, her silence when the mailman dropped off letters, and small details noticed by neighbors began to stir concern. The ranch that had once seemed perfectly maintained now showed signs of strain. A gate leaned crookedly, the grass near the fences grew taller than usual, and the cattle seemed more restless than normal. It started with small inquiries. Mrs. Banez Thompson, a neighbor who lived a few miles down the road, mentioned seeing the Collins Ranch from a distance. "I saw Martha yesterday," she said to a friend at the market. "She looked tired, not like herself." Whispers spread slowly through the town as townspeople speculated about what might be happening. Some assumed she had simply been busy. Others feared something more serious. Nobody wanted to intrude, but a growing sense of worry began to take hold. Meanwhile, Martha remained focused on her work, determined not to show weakness. The accident from the previous weeks had left her sore, and the daily chores felt heavier than ever. She moved carefully across the fields, checking the fences, feeding the cattle, and tending to the horses. Every movement sent sharp reminders of her vulnerability, but she refused to stop. Pride, years of independence, and the deep desire to manage the ranch on her own drove her forward. She could not allow herself to depend on anyone else, not even the kind-hearted neighbors who might have helped if she had asked. Despite her efforts to maintain normalcy, reality began to encroach. Martha's body could not recover as quickly as it once had, and fatigue started to set in more frequently. She would pause while mending fences, leaning on her tools to catch her breath. Nights became longer and more painful, and she often awoke with stiff joints and sore muscles. But she carried on, telling herself that this was part of life, part of the price for independence. The thought of asking for help was almost unbearable. She feared that doing so would mark the end of the strong, capable image she had built over decades. One morning, a neighbor named Tom, who had known Martha since childhood, drove past the ranch on his way to town and noticed her standing in the field, slowly repairing a section of broken fence. He slowed his truck and waved, but Martha only nodded briefly and continued her work. Tom frowned. Something was clearly different. He drove a little further, then turned around and parked by the gate. "Martha!" he called, his voice loud enough to carry across the fields. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and forced a smile. "Morning, Tom," she said quietly. "Everything's fine." Tom hesitated. He had seen Martha work countless times, but something about the way she moved made his stomach tighten. "You don't look fine," he said gently.
"Do you need some help?" Martha shook her head, masking the pain that ran through her back and legs.
"I can manage," she said firmly. "Thank you, but really, I'm okay." Tom knew better. He could see the strain in her movements, the tension in her shoulders, and the way she paused frequently to catch her breath. He wanted to push further, to insist on helping, but Martha's pride was unyielding. With a concerned glance, he nodded and left, unable to shake the feeling that she was silently carrying a burden far heavier than the work in front of her. As the week went on, the whispers in town grew louder. People began to notice her absence more and more. The grocery store clerk mentioned that she hadn't come in for weeks. The postman noticed her mailbox was slightly crooked, and letters had piled up. Small, ordinary things that most people would not think twice about became signs of alarm. The townspeople realized that Martha, the woman they had admired for her independence, might be struggling in ways no one had imagined. One afternoon, a few concerned neighbors decided to visit the ranch. They arrived quietly, walking up the long driveway, trying not to startle Martha. When she saw them approaching, her first instinct was to retreat, to pull back behind the walls of her home and maintain the independence she valued so much. But there was no way to hide completely. They greeted her warmly, asking questions, and slowly began to notice the signs that she had tried so hard to conceal. "Martha," said Mrs. Thompson gently, "you've been working so hard. You need to rest sometimes. You can't do everything alone." Martha forced a small smile. "I'm managing," she said softly, but her words lacked conviction. She felt the weight of their concern pressing on her. For years she had hidden her pain and struggled silently, and now the quiet town she had protected herself from was seeing the truth. It was uncomfortable, almost embarrassing, but beneath that discomfort was a small, unspoken relief. For the first time in a long while, someone else was acknowledging her struggle. The neighbors stayed for a while, helping with chores, fixing a loose fence, and offering support in small ways. Martha found herself reluctantly accepting assistance. At first it felt strange, even shameful, to have others around her while she worked. But as the hours passed, she began to feel a subtle shift. The burden she had carried alone for so many years felt lighter, and the work that had once seemed endless and exhausting became manageable. She realized that allowing others in did not mean losing her independence. It meant surviving, thriving even, in ways she had not allowed herself before. As evening fell, Martha sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The neighbors had left, but the impact of their visit lingered. She felt a mix of pride, relief, and something she hadn't felt in a long time: connection. For decades she had carried her pain alone, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. But now, she understood that strength could also mean letting others share the load, even if only for a little while. Martha's thoughts turned to the past as the sky turned dark. She remembered her parents who had taught her how to manage a ranch and endure hardship. She thought of the friends she had lost to distance and time. She thought of the town, once a distant background to her life, now becoming a part of her support system in ways she had never anticipated. The realization was both humbling and empowering. She had faced so many challenges alone, yet she had survived. And now, by allowing others into her life, she could face even more challenges with renewed strength. As she prepared for bed that night, Martha felt a quiet sense of anticipation. Life on the ranch would never be easy, and her pain would remain a part of her life. But the presence of others, even in small doses, offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps she did not have to bear every burden alone. Perhaps resilience was not just about enduring silently, but about knowing when to let others help carry the weight. Lying in bed, Martha listened to the soft night sounds of the ranch. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant cry of a coyote echoed across the fields. She felt the ache in her back and legs, but it no longer felt insurmountable. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a sense of cautious optimism. The town was beginning to see her truth, and in doing so, they were becoming part of her life in a way that was both comforting and necessary. Martha knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges. The work on the ranch never ended, and her pain would continue to demand attention. But she also knew that she was no longer completely alone. The people in town, those who had once only observed her from a distance, were beginning to understand her struggles. And in that understanding, Martha found a new form of strength, one born not only from endurance, but from connection, from allowing herself to be seen and supported by those who cared. The night settled over the ranch, and Martha drifted into sleep with a quiet heart. She had faced her pain alone for years, and though the journey was far from over, she had begun to understand that sharing her struggles did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. And in the soft darkness of her home, surrounded by the land she had fought to protect, Martha allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope for the days to come. The days that followed the neighbor's visit brought a mixture of relief and unease for Martha Collins. She appreciated the help, yet a part of her felt uneasy, as though allowing others into her life had exposed a side of herself she had carefully hidden for decades. Her pride, built over years of facing hardship alone, was difficult to reconcile with the reality of depending on others, even in small ways. But the accident from weeks before, combined with her body's growing exhaustion, made it impossible to continue ignoring her limits. Each morning, rising from bed felt like lifting a weight that grew heavier with every year. The pain in her back and legs no longer subsided as quickly, and her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion after even the simplest tasks. One afternoon, as the sun blazed over the ranch, Martha moved slowly along the edge of the barn, feeding the horses. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts, and she paused to lean against the wooden posts for support. She felt a sharp pain shoot through her side, a reminder of the fall that had haunted her for weeks. For the first time, she admitted to herself that she could not keep going exactly as she had before. She needed help, and not just for a few chores here and there, but real assistance with the daily work that had become physically impossible to manage alone. The thought of asking for help terrified her. Martha had always been fiercely independent. She had faced storms, floods, and harsh winters on her own. She had repaired fences, fed animals, and worked long days with no one to share the burden. To rely on others now felt like admitting weakness, like acknowledging that she was no longer the unbreakable woman everyone in town believed her to be. But as she stared at the horizon, the expanse of fields stretching endlessly before her, she realized something she had never truly allowed herself to see. Strength was not only in enduring pain alone, but also in knowing when to reach out for support. Later that day, Martha walked into town for supplies, a rare visit she had been avoiding for weeks. The townspeople immediately noticed her slower pace, the way she leaned slightly on her walking stick, and the careful way she carried her groceries. Murmurs followed her as she passed, subtle but filled with concern. The local doctor, Dr. Harris, approached her outside the general store, his brow furrowed. "Martha, are you all right?" he asked gently. "You've been pushing yourself too hard." Martha hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Pride and habit battled against reason, but finally she allowed herself a small, honest answer. "I'm managing," she said, though her voice lacked the confidence she usually carried. Harris's eyes softened. He had known Martha for years and understood her stubborn nature. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said. "I can help, and so can others. You shouldn't have to suffer in silence." That evening, Martha returned to the ranch, her mind heavy with thought. She realized that accepting help did not mean giving up her independence. It meant preserving it in a sustainable way. She began to think practically, considering which tasks could be shared and how to organize the work so that her body would not continue to deteriorate under constant strain. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to plan for a future where she could maintain the ranch without enduring unbearable pain every single day. The following morning, neighbors arrived to assist with chores. Martha watched cautiously as they began to mend fences, repair gates, and feed the animals. At first it felt strange, almost awkward, to have others doing what she had always done, alone. She hovered nearby, checking the work, offering suggestions, and quietly supervising. But gradually she noticed something remarkable. The work that had once seemed endless now moved more quickly and efficiently. She felt her body relax slightly, the tension easing as her back and legs experienced relief. The realization was liberating. She had survived so long in isolation, but now she could thrive with support. During breaks, the neighbors shared stories and laughter, drawing Martha into their conversations. She found herself smiling more freely than she had in years. The isolation that had weighed on her heart began to lift, replaced with a sense of community she had not realized she had been missing. The ranch, once a place of solitude and struggle, was slowly becoming a space of shared effort and mutual respect. Martha's pride remained intact, but it had transformed. She now understood that pride did not require suffering alone. It could exist alongside collaboration and care. One day, while checking the water troughs, Martha reflected on the past. She remembered her parents, who had taught her the ways of ranch life, and the friends she had lost over the years. She thought about the countless days she had endured pain in silence, believing it was the only way to prove her strength, and she realized that she had been strong, yes, but the strength she carried had been isolating. By allowing others to help, she was not weakening herself. She was finally embracing a form of strength that included connection, compassion, and shared effort. The turning point came when Martha injured her leg while moving a heavy bale of hay. This time, the pain was sharper, more intense, and it forced her to sit down on the barn floor. The neighbors, who were nearby, immediately rushed to her side. Martha initially tried to brush it off, attempting to stand, but the pain was undeniable. They helped her inside the house, carefully supporting her as she moved. In that moment, Martha felt a wave of relief mixed with vulnerability. She had finally admitted, fully and openly, that she could not do everything alone. In the days that followed, Dr. Cav, Harris and several neighbors coordinated to help Martha with daily tasks. They repaired fences, fed the animals, and even helped her organize the ranch for easier management. Martha gradually adapted to this new rhythm. At first, she felt awkward and resistant, but over time, she discovered a surprising sense of freedom. The pain in her back and legs was still present, but it no longer dominated every moment. She could rest when needed, move carefully without fear of overexertion, and even find moments of enjoyment in her work again. Martha also began to share her story with the townspeople. She spoke quietly about the accident, the years of hidden pain, and the loneliness she had endured. Her honesty surprised many. People who had admired her independence now felt a deeper respect for her resilience, recognizing the immense challenges she had faced silently. They were inspired not only by her endurance, but by her courage in finally acknowledging her limits and seeking help. As the weeks passed, Martha's relationship with the town began to transform. She was no longer the distant, unapproachable rancher. She became a figure of quiet admiration, someone who had faced unimaginable challenges, yet remained strong and dignified. The community rallied around her, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect and care. Martha learned to accept this attention and support, understanding that strength could coexist with vulnerability. She began to see that connection, empathy, and shared effort could enhance her life rather than diminish it. By the time the first frost of winter dusted the fields, Martha felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her ranch was in better condition than it had been in years. Her body was experiencing less constant pain, and her spirit felt lighter. She had faced her breaking point and emerged stronger, not because she endured alone, but because she allowed herself to be supported. The lesson was profound. Independence did not require isolation, and resilience did not demand suffering in silence. Martha had survived, thrived, and discovered a new form of strength, one built on courage, acceptance, and connection. That night, as she sat on the porch wrapped in a warm blanket, Martha watched the stars appear over the wide Texas sky. She reflected on how far she had come, from a woman silently enduring pain and isolation to one who embraced support and community. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of accomplishment not only for maintaining the ranch, but for embracing the truth of her own humanity. The pain would always be part of her life, but she no longer feared it alone. She had faced her breaking point, accepted help, and discovered that true strength sometimes comes from allowing others in. Martha finally closed her eyes, letting the gentle night sounds of the ranch soothe her. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She had survived the hardships of the past, endured years of hidden pain, and emerged not only unbroken, but wiser, stronger, and connected. And as she drifted into sleep, the ranch, the land, and the community around her seemed to hum with quiet approval, acknowledging the remarkable woman who had quietly shocked the town, not through weakness, but through enduring courage, and the grace to accept help when it mattered most. Winter passed slowly, and the first signs of spring brought new life to the Collins Ranch. Martha Collins had changed. The woman who had once carried the weight of the land and her pain entirely alone now moved with a quiet confidence, balanced by the knowledge that she did not have to face everything by herself. The ranch was thriving. Fences were sturdy, animals well fed, and the land cared for with a renewed energy that Martha had not felt in years. But the most important change was not in the ranch itself, but in Martha. She had learned that strength was not only measured by what she could endure alone, but by her courage to accept help and allow connection. The townspeople had continued to support her, offering assistance without judgment or pity. Slowly, Martha began to embrace the relationships she had once avoided. She welcomed neighbors into her home, sharing meals and stories. She laughed again, a sound that had been absent for far too long, and she discovered the joy of simple companionship. The once lonely ranch echoed with human warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from shared effort, understanding, and care. Martha realized that while she had prided herself on her independence, there was a deeper form of strength in vulnerability, in letting others walk alongside her. One morning, as Martha tended the horses, a group of townspeople arrived at the ranch carrying tools, supplies, and fresh bread from the bakery. They had decided to help with the early spring chores, repairing fences, cleaning barns, and preparing fields for the new season. At first, Martha watched from a distance, hesitant to impose or interrupt their work. But as they approached, greeting her warmly, she felt a sense of gratitude she had never experienced before. The pride that had once made her resist help now gave way to a quiet appreciation for the community she had long kept at arm's length. Over the following weeks, Martha's bond with the town deepened. She shared her knowledge of ranching, teaching younger neighbors the skills that had been passed down through her family for generations. In turn, they shared their energy and support, helping with heavy tasks and ensuring the ranch remained safe and manageable. Martha found joy in this exchange, a balance between independence and collaboration. She realized that her strength had not diminished by allowing others in. It had grown, enriched by the connections she had forged and the shared work that lightened her burden. The town's respect for Martha reached a quiet peak when the local community organized a small gathering in her honor. It was not a grand celebration, but a simple acknowledgement of her resilience, courage, and dedication. Neighbors gathered on the ranch, bringing food, gifts, and kind words. They shared stories of Martha's determination, her ability to overcome hardship, and the hidden pain she had endured for years. Martha listened, humbled and moved, feeling a deep connection to people who had once been distant observers of her life. She realized that her story had inspired others, not because she suffered silently, but because she faced her struggles with dignity, courage, and ultimately, grace. During the gathering, Martha addressed the crowd. Her voice was soft but steady. "I have spent many years working alone," she said, thinking that asking for help was weakness. "But I have learned that it is not. True strength is knowing when to stand on your own and when to accept support. I am grateful to each of you for helping me carry this burden and for showing me that community is a form of strength in itself." The townspeople applauded, many with tears in their eyes. They had witnessed Martha's transformation, from the silent, stoic rancher to a woman who balanced courage with compassion, independence with connection. In that moment, Martha felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had survived years of pain, isolation, and doubt, and emerged stronger and wiser. She had inspired a town not through perfection or fearlessness, but through resilience, humility, and the courage to embrace help. In the days that followed, Martha continued her work on the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose. she no longer tried to do everything alone. She rested when necessary, accepted assistance willingly, and even enjoyed the company of those who came to help. Her body still reminded her of the years of toil and the injury that had never fully healed, but the pain no longer ruled her life. Martha had discovered that life could be challenging and beautiful at the same time, and that facing difficulties with support made the burden lighter and the victory sweeter. Spring turned into summer, and the ranch flourished. The cattle grazed in healthy pastures, the barns were sturdy, and the fields prepared for planting yielded new growth. Martha moved among her land with a calm assurance, aware of her limitations but unafraid of the future. She had found a balance that had once seemed impossible, a life of independence enriched by connection, of resilience strengthened by compassion. She had learned that accepting help did not diminish her, it enhanced her. One warm evening, Martha stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the rolling fields. The sky glowed in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air was filled with the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the grass, and the distant chirping of birds returning to their nests. Martha's heart felt light, a contrast to the heaviness of years past. She reflected on her journey from a young woman carrying the ranch alone to the accident that forced her to confront her vulnerability, and finally to this moment where she stood surrounded by a supportive community and a thriving ranch. Martha thought about the town and its people who had once been distant observers, now becoming an integral part of her life. She thought about her parents and the lessons they had imparted: hard work, independence, and resilience. And she thought about herself, a woman who had endured years of pain, yet had emerged not only intact, but transformed. She realized that the true measure of her strength was not in the hours of labor she had endured, but in her courage to face her own limitations and embrace help when it mattered most. As the evening deepened into night, Martha felt a sense of peace she had not known in decades. The ranch, the land, and the community around her all felt connected, a network of life and support that enriched her existence. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, storms to weather, fences to repair, and the lingering pain in her body, but she faced them with confidence, fortified by the lessons of the past and the support of those who cared. Martha's story became a quiet legend in the town. People spoke of her determination, her resilience, and the remarkable way she balanced independence with connection. She had shocked the town, not through reckless action or dramatic gestures, but by living a life of courage, endurance, and quiet grace. Her pain, once hidden, became a source of inspiration. It reminded people that strength is multifaceted, that vulnerability can coexist with power, and that no one has to face life entirely alone. In the years that followed, Martha continued to work the ranch she loved, but with a lighter heart and a stronger community around her. She shared her knowledge, her experience, and her story with anyone willing to listen, teaching them that life's challenges can be met with courage, and that asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. Martha had transformed her pain into a source of strength, her isolation into connection, and her struggles into a story of hope and inspiration. And so, on the wide, sunlit fields of the Collins Ranch, Martha stood tall, surrounded by her animals, her land, and the people who cared. She had faced years of hidden pain, endured isolation, and carried burdens that few could imagine. But she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. She had shocked the town not because of her suffering, but because of the grace, courage, and resilience she had shown in living her life fully, authentically, and with heart. The ranch thrived, the town respected her, and Martha Collins finally knew that true strength comes not only from endurance, but from the courage to embrace life with all its challenges together.
Now, The on-saying prizes begin to track from the time of its own bankrupt.